Hello, everyone. So this is Thomas from Hong Kong UI Dendron, the Innovation and Entrepreneurs Hub at Hong Kong U. We are happy to have Marina Chan from MIT Hong Kong Innovation Lab today to introduce the business module canvas and explain how does it help in your startup venture. So MIT Hong Kong Innovation Looks organized the famous MEMC program, the MIT Entrepreneurship and Maker Skills program. I guess many of you have heard of it. And Marina Chang is the director of education there, and she oversees all the educational activities for learners across secondaries and different levels of education. So without further ado, let me pass the time to Marina.
Great. Well, thank you, Taurus, for the introduction, and welcome everybody back to this particular segment. We're looking at the business model canvas. So I understand that you guys have formed teams, you're working on your problem scopes, anchoring along one of the 4 key verticals. So, ideally, we often have great plans about, we have an end goal and we're just going to get there. We're going to just get there somehow. But, in reality, especially in the startup business, especially with venture creation, it's not all that simple. There's a lot of ups and downs. No matter how well we plan something, there's going to be a lot of roadblocks and barriers and detours that we cannot always plan for. So the goal of this session is really to give you guys a framework in terms of at least covering your key bases to make sure that you have your business plan covered. You have this great idea. You want to be able to figure out how do you get this into the market, because it's only until you get it into the market that's when you can make real impact for society, real innovation, right? Otherwise, it just becomes a cool idea, captive in your head or on paper, and you're not able to really roll that out. So we're going to lay some foundations for you guys, and feel free to just jump in and ask questions. Feel free to unmute yourself. Feel free to write something down in the chat box. I'll try to check that periodically and pause for questions. Okay, let's get started. So first off, just wanting to throw this out. What is a business model, or what do you guys understand as a business model? Please write down your ideas on chat. There's no right or wrong answers. Just want to get your creative juices going. Any guesses? What is a business model? Has anyone heard of a business model before? I'm sure it's come across at some point. Any ideas? What's a business model? How you gain revenue and sustain your business? Yeah, thanks, Samuel. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, how do you make yourself sustainable in the long run? Yeah, your working plan to succeed. Exactly. Thanks, John. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, in any venture, social enterprises, for-profits, you want to be able to sustain. You want to be able to have your great idea, have some impact, and that impact requires some type of revenue, some type of profitability to keep yourself afloat. So the business model is a way to get there. Right? It's a way to really deliver and capture that value for your organization. So we're going to be going through a quick framework developed by Dr. Osterwalder. He developed the business model generation, I think sometime in the early 2000s. And it's actually been quite a very useful tool for a lot of folks, especially the folks in the venture world, to understand how do you get a good picture of your whole business without having to go through a lot of lengthy reporting, right? The key of the business model canvas is to really find that what we call the problem solution fit, right? What is that customer problem? How do you understand that customer from a human-centric perspective? And then how do you create value for that particular customer? And that value should be something that the customer can benefit from and derive important attributes from your solution. So another way to look at it is what we call a value proposition canvas. You may have come across this before in certain classes. It's a way to look at the customer profile, understand the customers, what the customer wants, the customer behaviors. There may be some unspoken things that the customer wants, but you as like an entrepreneur needs to kind of uncover these pain points, right? These insights from a customer by talking to them, by interviewing them, observing how they interact with current products or current solutions out there, and then find a way in which you can actually intervene and create a better experience for this customer. So when it comes to understanding the solution, then, right, you need to then be able to develop that key tech-enabled solution that can help fulfill that particular customer pain point, right? Be able to relieve their pain, be able to add benefits and create value through your products and services. And we'll be going through a little bit more of that. As I mentioned, business model canvas is much better because typically, in the past, in the old days, we'd have 30-page reports, right? Which is lengthy, boring, very dry. Right now, we have a business model canvas, and you can download this online as well. Just Google, BMC or business model canvas. You can get the same. You can get the same slide here, and you guys could print it out into like A3 perhaps to make it more interactive for your team to kind of put sticky notes on. That's the way we typically do it. We blow this up into A3, use sticky notes, and we can like move sticky notes around from one section to another. So in a nutshell, business model canvas comprises of these 9 key segments, right? Looking at your customer, who your customer is, what do they care about? How do you bring in that value through your key product or service? And then how do you reach those customers? By building these relationships, by creating these key customer channels. And then what are the actual activities you're going to offer for these customers? What resources do you need to support your product or service? And what key partnerships do you need to forge in order to really bring this all together? And ultimately, what are your revenue and cost streams? How much are you going to charge? What is your cost base? And to make sure that this is indeed a viable business model. Again, with BMC, the key is on focus, it's on flexibility, it's for transparency, it's for visibility for your whole team to get a quick snapshot of what's going on. And also it's a great tool to divide and conquer. So you guys are obviously working in remote teams. So this is a great way to also understand these 9 boxes, who's going to be doing what, and to better manage your team resources and tasks and responsibilities. So these are the 9 building blocks as you saw on that page. And we're just going to go through one by one to get you guys understanding exactly what we're talking about with regards to these business model building blocks. So, first off, we have customer segments. We always start with a customer. There's, there's several other business models out there. We teach one at MIT called Discipline Entrepreneurship Framework. We always start with the customer. This is so important because you're trying to solve for the customer, right? And you get more success by having your ideas market driven, right? Meaning you've done research on your market, you've understood, who needs, who is experiencing this particular pain point, and how you guys, with your competitive advantage, how can you guys actually do a better job than competitors, right? So you have to really understand your customer segment. One case in point, does anyone remember this? Google Glass back in 2012. Anyone can share what happened with them? Or what is this actually? What does this do? You can type your responses on chat. What does this particular gadget do? I think it was developed in 2012. Yeah, to record videos, to capture these special moments. And so when Google Glass rolled this out, they didn't talk to enough people, right? They were a bunch of, they kind of spoke within their tech team, mostly male. And then they were like, oh, this is so cool. We're going to be doing this. It's going to be really great. People can use it at concerts, at sports stadiums, recording these special moments. And then what happened, right? Did it do well? Not in the first instance. Yeah, exactly. As Nick said, it didn't do well. Why? Does anybody have any guesses? Why? Like, would you wear this? Privacy, yeah. There's privacy issues. It was bulky. There was no, poor product market fit. Absolutely. they didn't do enough research. They wanted this to go out into the mass consumer market, but they did not segment the market well enough, right? They realized it didn't work. And it was very expensive, exactly. It was like 1,500 US dollars. That's like over 10,000 Hong Kong dollars, right? Very expensive with limited functionality, and it looks ugly. It makes you look creepy, and it tells people that, you know, it feels like you have some special information that they don't. So it kind of divides from a social perspective as well. So it did not do well. So what happened was, you know, obviously it was a big embarrassment for them, and people still talk about it, like in this session right now. So it's a really hard lesson learned, especially for such a big brand. So but they did try to, you know, revamp. They did go back to their customer research. They then found an interesting niche with factories, right? And so back in 2017, they started a second act, right? They were applying, they then looked at, you know, how are factory workers utilizing this from a business perspective, from a work productivity perspective. So then they launched an enterprise edition, which then ended up being still struggling, to be honest, because then this became a tech in search of a market, which is oftentimes very difficult to do. You do want things to be market led. That would be easier to launch into the market. But they did, at least they did some research, and then they did find a way to adjust this technology for a slightly more suitable market. It's still expensive though, but you know, if enterprises are buying this at a limited quantity, it might work. So they had to learn the hard way. But it also goes to show that you do need to look at the customer. You do need to do sufficient research before you launch a product. And especially with tech, oftentimes we think, oh, we need to be in stealth mode, right? Because there'll be copycats. But the reality is, if you do your market research well, you can innovate and gain advantage, not just with the tech, but with how you guys build relationships, with business model innovation, not just product or tech innovation. So that's very important to keep in mind. So once you have identified that key customer market and figure out the pain point, you know, the key then is to figure out what do the customer value, so that you can incorporate that into your solution, right? Oftentimes it could be like the way when we buy new things or new gadgets or new sportswear, you know, it could be newness, it could be performance, it might be something that we can customize. You know, it's even like Starbucks. I know the coffee isn't the best, but somehow I like it. You know, there is that branding, that status, the design, maybe what they represent, maybe some of the sustainability elements of it. So it's hard to pinpoint, right? But therefore you need to really go out and talk to customers and really understand and have a conversation with them to understand what is that value that they care about. Oftentimes it is more of an emotional word, rather than, oh, I like something, I value Wi-Fi or I value Bluetooth, right? That's just a feature, right? It's just it doesn't really mean anything, right? I value Wi-Fi because I can connect with people. I can get the job done. It can, you know, lead to more convenience, right? So oftentimes it's really that, right? Or even with a coffee, right? If you even think about what you guys consume, what you guys do, why do you do the things you guys do, right? Have a session to really reflect on that, because oftentimes it might not be the fact that this has caffeine, right? Obviously I do want to get a kick in the morning and have caffeine, but there's tons of other products out there that can give me a better kick, right? It might be the experience of, oh, you know, going into a Starbucks store, you know, getting a cup of coffee, and maybe the service that the barista, you know, provides. So these kind of things you can only really uncover when you talk to the customer. And that's when you can understand, what do they care about, right? Are they price sensitive? And I'm sure many people are kind of in some way price sensitive, but some people are more price sensitive than others, right? So you need to understand what is it that you can offer that will get that particular segment to purchase, you know, your product, right? I want to just pause here and really talk a little bit more about getting the job done, right? Getting the job done is an interesting phenomenon. If you think about, you know, some of the cool kind of innovations out there right now, like Uber, right? And, or especially during the pandemic, right? Deliveroo, you know, Foodpanda, all of these, you know, online platforms, right? What people want is to get the job done, right? They don't really care that it's on an app per se, right? I care that I can just call, call a stranger and then that car would come, right? And so what you need to think about is you want to get that job done, and that's where the real value is. What is the job, right? It's the convenience. Like for me, it's the convenience, right? Um, and the fact that I can just call, and also cleanliness, right? For other people, it might be cleaner than taxis, right? And so it's you really need to understand this through your customer interviews in order to figure out what is it that the person wants. Like what is it that they want the job done? It might not be the fancy gadgets, it might not be the interface of Uber, just be the fact that, hey, you guys have a huge platform, you can connect to so many different recreational, drivers, including taxis that also might want to install Uber, and be able to, connect me in minutes, right, to an Uber driver. So you need to think about that. What we want is a job done, and also think about, experience over the product. Don't get too, hung up on the product and the features and the Bluetooth or the connectivity and all that. Imagine like if you're Nestle, right? Oftentimes, again, coffee, I'm a big coffee person. We think of Nestle as, okay, you guys own Nespresso, you have all these cool machines, and we might think of them as a coffee machine business, but in reality, they actually want to position themselves in the morning experience business. So that when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you think about is that cup of Nespresso coffee, right? So you want to really think about what do people care about as the experience over product, because that's more lasting. And that actually tells you more about what they value. So the experience. So have a think about that. Especially, I think some of these teams I heard from the Techathon organizers that many of you are looking at social impact and healthcare, right? So when it comes to healthcare and well-being, it is very much about that experience, that well-being. The fact that you're safe, that you're monitoring your health, and that you're trying to de-risk possibilities of injuries or accidents, or encountering any ill health in any physical, social, or mental perspective. So I think it's important for those teams to also think about this experience over the product and how you can provide that peace of mind for your potential end users. Another thing to think about when you think about the value is what's your core? Like, what is your secret sauce that will be hard for people to replicate? This is a great diagram that we drew out from the Discipline Entrepreneurship MIT curriculum. And the way it works is, imagine your organization is this castle in the middle, right? So, you want to make sure that your castle is built on, strong materials, you can protect it. But at the same time, any core can eventually, people can catch up to it, right? Competitors can eventually catch up to your business model, or they can capture your partnerships and whatnot. So you do want to create what we call moats, right? A moat is that kind of watery lake area right outside. You want to slow them down. You want to create barriers and hurdles to slow them down. They'll eventually get there, but you want to slow them down. So it's important that as a team, you're thinking of ways to not just create a great solution, but how are you going to protect your solution so that competitors will take a longer time to catch up with you? Okay, think of obviously like WhatsApp, Facebook. I mean, yes, they started somewhere and they had a first mover advantage, but now they're really hard to get to. Why is that? What would be the core for like WhatsApp? Let's say, for instance, or Facebook. Any guesses? So give me examples. Let's say for WhatsApp, yeah, network effect, exactly, yeah. Mass users, platform effect, absolutely, yeah. You guys are very smart. Yeah, connecting with people, absolutely, yeah. And it's important to know that your core can also evolve over time, right? Think about Google, right? Yeah, end-to-end encryption, exactly, yeah, with WhatsApp as well. So they have that extra level of security. Think of Google though. Cores can also evolve over a longer period of time. When Google was launched, what were they good at? What were they good for? I mean, they're still good at that. Google. Search engine, yeah. And then now they're doing, analytics. Yeah, using machine learning and all these cool tools, right? But what they've also done right now, which is their core that they've evolved over time, is that they have this great platform, this money making platform with what? Advertisement. Exactly. Yeah. Huge advertisement. So that's a core for Google. If anybody wants to replicate another cool search engine, which a lot of technologies can do now, they'll never catch up with Google because Google has this amazing network effect with a lot of vendors wanting to place ads, and they make a ton of money. So that's another core that they've developed over time, right? Again, search engine is still great, analytics is still great, but it's this this network, this business, these business networks that they have through ads that have really cemented them as one of the key players out there uh, in the internet world. So have a think about your core. So moving on to the third aspect is customer channels, right? So you've got your customer, you've got the value proposition, and you know what product and solution will get them excited. Now it's time to think about how do you go to market? How do you reach your customers, right? Where would you want to advertise yourselves, right? And it doesn't have to be always paid, especially with startups. You guys are low on resources and money, so think of creative ways in which you want to get the message out there. Word of mouth is often very, very important. Testimonials are important. You might want to do beta tests before you get into so they can start talking to your customers about how do you improve your product and how do you make sure that it really suits their tastes, and create after sales services. So these are things that you will likely need to do. Definitely the awareness phase and the evaluation phase, especially as a startup. And then you also want to build these key customer relationships. And when it comes to customer relationships, think of it from an ecosystem perspective, not just the end user that you're trying to target, right? Because sometimes your products may be may be used by the end user, but it will be bought by someone else, right? Take, for instance, very easy example would be baby products, right? Who would be the end user for baby products? The end user for baby products. Babies, exactly, yeah. But who would be the economic buyer? Who would be, yeah, the mothers, the parents. Yeah, some parents could also be, like, let's say if it's like I don't know, if it's like a breastfeeding machine, or if it's like a baby carrier, then the mom or the dad would be the one using it, right? But yeah, if you from a simplistic perspective, end users could be the babies, and then the parents would be likely the economic buyers. So you need to be able to appeal. You need to be able to kind of stalk them and figure out, where do parents read? Well, what do parents? What do newborn? What do parents of newborn babies? What do they read? Where do they go? Right? And try to find those locations where you can make yourself known, right? Through trade shows, obviously through advertisements in baby magazines or parenting magazines, right? I don't know, like school fairs or whatnot, right? So it's key to understand that different dynamic, right? That you want to be making yourself known to an ecosystem, or that whole value chain, not just to the end user who ultimately use your product. So this is also drawn out from our MIT entrepreneurship curriculum. So we call this a decision-making unit, right? And there's more players than just the mom and the baby, right? So let's say, if you're creating a product that would involve like government intervention, or like hospitals, or whatnot, or like community centers for the elderly, you need to be dealing with a lot of individuals, right? Let's say simple case would be, let's say you're trying to launch a new product for elderlies, right? To help their caregivers be more aware of when the elderly that they take care of, when they may be at risk of a fall or some injury, right? So let's say you have this product that the elderly person will need to wear, right? It's like a tech wearable that would notify the caregiver, if he or she has a fall, right? So that they can respond in a timely manner. Obviously, you have so many different players, right? You have the elderly, who's the ultimate end user. You have the economic buyer, who might be the caregiver, could be the adult child of that elderly. But at the same time, you have other people called champions, who's typically a cheerleader. So it could be another It could be likely another caregiver who's a friend of the caregiver who'd say, hey, I bought this for my aging mom, and it's a great tool, right? So you also need to think about, how do you make sure that these champions also are aware of your product, because that they are the mouthpiece for you, right? At the same time, you also want to be targeting influencers. So influencers, you can imagine them as KOLs, right? Key opinion leaders. It could be celebrities, it could be a little bit more mainstream, but these are key people who might be writing blogs about elderly products, or Geron tech products. It could be trade show magazines where you might have writers talk about certain different experiences at the trade show. So you want to also target these people. For a lot of our hardware tech companies that we work with, oftentimes they go to let's say their market is in the US, they want to make sure that they get their products out covered by The Verge or TechCrunch or Mashable. So these sort of magazines that tend to appeal to tech enthusiasts, especially wanting to try new tech products. But you need to profile it, right? Because an elderly product might not actually end up going to those magazines, or the viewership might not be there. So you do need to do research in terms of where the people that you want to know about your product, where did they go looking for information? You'll obviously have people who are also in a veto position or a compliance position. So let's say you want to be selling this elderly product through a community center or through the hospital authority, right? That's a big hurdle. You need to make sure that the folks that have the authority to say yes will indeed say yes. So they can be a big hurdle for you. You can't just say, oh, we're going to partner with the government. Well, you need to also, you may be asked by the judges, how do you plan to do that? Have you done your research? What are the obstacles? And do you have an edge? Like maybe somebody at the hospital authority, maybe you have that leg up, So you need to be able to understand that these are the different players in your decision-making unit, and that your product isn't just, your product design is targeted for the end user, but the people that are saying yes and buying the product, it is an ecosystem. So just be aware of that. Especially for, when you're looking at government or when you're looking at partnerships with nonprofits, you do need to think of it from a very, very much an ecosystem perspective rather than just a direct customer perspective. You also need to think about your product, if it's going to be a B2B product or a B2C product, just a show of, just bring it out. What's the difference between what's B2C and B2B? When I say B2C, what am I talking about? B2C. Yeah, so business to customer, yeah, and business to business, that would be the difference. Yeah, business to customer, exactly. So let's say Starbucks, they sell this, right? It's a B2C, right? I'm buying it. They have a service, they're creating coffees for me. On the back end, when Starbucks sources their coffee beans from South African farmers or whatnot, those farmers are selling to Starbucks from a B2B perspective, right? Those farmers are not selling to me directly, right? They're selling to Starbucks. So that would be an example of the coffee farmers, coffee growers, they're selling to Starbucks, and it's a B2B, okay? And Starbucks selling to me, that's B2C. So that's a way you guys can think about it. When it comes to B2B, you do have a little bit more ecosystem players you need to look at. But B2B tends to can make a lot of money, because then you're signing up larger contracts, and they can become your business clients can become your distributors, right? So yeah, something to keep in mind as you guys venture into your projects. So moving on, number 5 is the revenue streams. So yeah, when you guys think about the impact that you want to make, you also want to think about how are you guys going to keep your assets and keep your resources, right? There's a lot of, typically with startups, it's like labor cost. It is, rent. It is, equipment. It could be R&D. It could be marketing. A lot of marketing costs would actually be there for you guys in the first year or two, because you guys are really you guys are newbies, right? You want to get your word out. You want to be marketing. You want to be getting onto everybody's eyeballs, right? Especially on the internet these days. So if you think about different revenue streams, licensing and brokerage, I don't think that's as relevant for startups unless you are developing like research and you want to then you've patented that research and then you want to sell parts of that through a licensing agreement with somebody. But otherwise, I think right now as startups are really just thinking about building the product first before thinking about the licensing. But even as you're building the product, you do want to think about what's the pricing model. How are you going to be pricing it? Is it a one-time transaction cost or a transaction fee, or would it be like a subscription fee? Or would you also be relying on some elements of advertising? And when it comes to advertising, I would not encourage you guys to have a business model solely on advertising. It will be very painful because as you've learned, or as we talked about, you need network effects to attract advertisers to want to pay you to advertise on your platform. So it's more of a chicken or the egg, right? Without having the networks, you can't, it's hard to have advertisers come in. So when it comes to pricing strategy, we typically look at these three. I mentioned the transaction, which is one-time transaction. Let's say I'm taking an Uber, I'm paying, for a cup of coffee with my credit card. I'm paying for a travel insurance. I'm paying for a coffee machine, like these one-time coffee machines. Subscription would be, it could be both. Like as you saw, there's like a smartwatch there that also might have annual subscriptions for certain app services. You'll also subscription would be Spotify. It could be your mobile network. And it would be insurance premium. So unlike travel insurance, which tends to be a one-off cost, insurance premiums you pay on a regular basis. So that would be something that would be, we would consider a subscription cost, and obviously credit card annual fees. So as you saw with ads, yeah, typically Google or Facebook could be platforms where you can also be, building revenue off of that as well. But again, you need to have an attractive platform with sufficient subscribers in order to attract these advertisers to come on board. But one thing to also stretch your creativity is when you think of any product you want to launch, think of how you can make that recurring, right? Why do we want to make something? Why do we want to make something recurring? Why do we want to make revenue come back to us again and again with the same customers? Why? Any ideas? Why can't we just build a product, sell it one time, and that's it? We don't see the customer again. You want to build a stable stream. Yeah, you want to create that habit, the reliance, the brand. Yeah, and that also builds a quality learning cost. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you guys all got it. Yeah, you want to make things recurring so that you don't, because it costs less to keep a current customer engaged than to acquire a totally new customer. Okay, this is from a purely marketing accounting perspective, right? It just costs a lot more to hook a new customer, to get a new customer on board than to keep an existing customer and then resell new products or kind of adjacent accessories, right? So think of ways in which you can be creative by taking your product and thinking of it from a subscription perspective. And it could be a physical product like an Oral-B, electric toothbrush plus the brush. We see a lot of examples like this with printers as well, with shavers, right? Shavers and the blade, printers and the ink, right? We see a lot of examples like this where they hook you guys on the product and then you just keep on making things recurring. If it's a software product and you don't have a hardware, that's okay too. Think of it from a subscription perspective. What is it? What is a subscription service that you can offer to keep them hooked, right? If it's about health and wellness, oftentimes people like to look at analytics, right? The improvement of certain things you're measuring over time, right? It could be measuring, I don't know, fitness levels, measuring, how hard, how many miles you've walked every month or whatnot, and then kind of come back and do an analytics for you. So I think those are some ways in which you can think about how do you create a more dynamic revenue stream, not just looking at it from a single transaction perspective. Again, there's something called the bait and hook strategy. So you saw before in my previous slide, there was like a normal coffee filter. So that's more on a one-time transaction. Which one do you think makes more money? The left or the right? Right, exactly, the right one. Yeah. And that's because, why? Because if I buy a machine, I also have to buy the capsules. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Same as printer and cartridges, coffee pods, exactly. Yeah, totally, totally. So the key is that you want to be able to make sure that you can create something that can hook the customers. And yet these Nespresso, they're so tricky. The coffee pod, like there's several other types of, bait and hook kind of type of coffee machines out there, but the coffee pods, they don't fit other coffee machines. They're so tricky. So I can only buy these ones and they're expensive. You're right. And that's why they also have loyalty points as well. So if you think about that being a strategy, you go to Nespresso, they know that they're expensive, or these coffee pods are expensive. So they hook you guys with loyalty cards, right? So every time you buy something, you get points, and then you can redeem them for something else. So you end up being more and more immersed with Nespresso, right? Such an evil empire. Okay, moving on. Key resources. So this is when you have that core problem solution fit. You figured out kind of how you're going to make money through different revenue streams. And then now you're thinking about what are the key resources do you need, right? Obviously you need physical capital, which is like physical space, equipment. You need intellectual capital. So that could be R&D if your product has some, research and development or patents involved. You do also need human resources. Obviously, this is especially key, especially with with startups. And you also need financial resources. So you need to figure out where are you going to source them. And oftentimes when it comes to pitching, especially if you're pitching a startup or a venture to investors, right, or to angel investors or venture capitalists, you are looking at telling them how much money do you need, right? How much money do you need? And you would typically want to show a 3 to 5 year projection, especially for hardware startups. And especially for hardware startups, it better make money after 5 years, because if not, then it's not worthwhile for them, right? Because if it's like a consumer gadget, oftentimes competitors can quickly, copy or whatnot. So you better, I think investors nowadays have a shorter attention span, unless they're dedicated to long-term capital where they're able to put that money in for 10 to 20 years. If not, I think look for ways so that you can show the investor that you will be able to recoup your costs within the first 5 years. That's really important. Key activities is exactly how are you going to deliver this product, right? If you're creating a software network, or if you're creating a platform, right, with a two-sided network where you're trying to match, let's say Amazon, right? They are a platform, and we call them a two-sided platform because they can attract buyers and sellers. Right? We have several of those type of networks out there that are doing really well. So you have to think about what are the key activities that you are doing so that you can drive that value for your customer, and what product. Or if it's going to be an educational enterprise, right? How are you producing these lessons, right? What kind of lessons are you producing? What kind of educational curriculum are you producing? Think of your key activities. Think of also these partnerships, right? So as I mentioned, with the decision-making unit, you do need to cultivate these customer relationships. So likewise with key partnerships, let's say in the case of the elderly example that I gave earlier, you want to be cultivating relationships with anyone that should be aware of your product, right? From that sales funnel, right? You want to be making elderly individuals aware. You want to be making the adult caregivers aware of your product. You also want to be considering making partnerships with, let's say, elderly homes and community centers so that they can help you guys maybe publicize your product or whatnot. You may also want maybe an endorsement from the hospital authority. or the government or whatnot. So you need to be thinking about what are the key partnerships you want to build so that you can make your product successful from both a marketing perspective, but also from a product perspective as well, right? You might need key partnerships to test out a curriculum at a school, let's say, right? So you need to build school partnerships if you're creating an ed tech product, right? So think of different ways, different partnerships, so that you're not just focused on just the end user, but the ecosystem around that end user is very, very important. Last but not least, cost, right? So we talked about the revenue part. The cost part is super important because if you're burning too much cash, especially at the beginning, you're just going to burn out, right? It's going to drive you out of business. So you need to think about, these different costs, right? Fixed costs tends to be, things that are not variable, right? It's utilities, rent, that, regardless of how much you produce or how productive you are, you still have to pay those costs, right? So figure out how you might need to work that into your calculations if you are planning to produce like a basic profit and loss statement for this program. I'm not sure if you guys will, but if you guys, it's just good to know going forward, right? That you need to produce, what investors care about is your profit and loss statement, your net income. And to see that the net income, yes, it's going to be, you're going to be losing money in the first 2-3 years, but to see that turn around by the 4th year and then be profitable somehow in the 5th year, that's actually pretty key, especially for hardware startups. And when we think about the cost structure, we like to think of it as, cost driven versus value driven. What that means is, when you do any negotiations or whatnot, don't think of it as, oh, this is how much I'm paying for, for raw materials, right? To build, let's say like the smartphone, right? There's a lot of cheap smartphones out there. They're probably using similar technology. I'm sure some are better than others, but the cost could be like, I don't know, maybe like, I don't know, how much do smartphones cost? The cheapest smartphones? Let's just say $800, $1,000. I don't know. Okay. And then, but you often, yeah, 600-700. Thank you, Nick. So that could be like the bare kind of, and let's say that could reflect the raw components, right? Buying stuff, from different suppliers and building it on your own could even be cheaper. But the fact is, if you're actually manufacturing something, and if you're pricing it based on, oh, $600 and $700, okay, well, why don't we just do a 30% markup or even double that? And, we'll make double, that's great. Don't think of it from a cost perspective. Think of it as a value perspective, which is, what does your company mean, right? Think of Apple, right? Apple could be very well paying for like $600, $700 for their raw materials, right? For their cost, but why are they charging $10,000 for a smartphone, right? It's because of the value. It's what the brand represents, right? Think of a very expensive handbag. Anyone? A very expensive handbag brand. Any guesses? Anybody knows? A very expensive handbag brand. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Bruce. Why are all these guys, the guys that are responding to the handbags? Yes, exactly. Hermes. It's like the ultimate, right? So, hey, they use leather. They might use crocodile leather, some rare crocodile leather. I don't know where they find these rare crocodiles. But the fact is, it's horrendous. How much do they charge? Do you know how much are these Hermes bags? Or Hermes bags? 70K. How good. You've done your research. Yeah, around that price, right? At the minimum, right? And even at that price, if you resell it, it can be even higher, right? So it actually has resale value. So it's all value driven, right? The cost could be similar to a Coach bag or, I don't know, Michael Kors bag or whatnot, which could be equally stylish and designed, but it's the whole brand, the status. Remember we talked about value proposition, brand and status was one of the elements of that, depending on your customer and what they value, right? So you have to think about when you sell your product, right? Or when you look at your company, don't think of it from a purely accounting cost perspective. Think of it as a value perspective. What do you guys represent? And why are you guys able to command a higher price and a higher value in the eyes of the customer? That's really important. Yeah. All right, so bring it all together. We talked about all 9 pieces. The way we typically look at it is, we do focus on the customer first. So customer segments first, and then you look at the value proposition, which is the pinkish blob in the middle. And then you go back to looking at the customer, looking at the relationships and the channels, and then you go into your key resources, right? And then you look at revenue. So that's pretty much how we would typically approach it. It's always customer and the value, right? That kind of goes hand in hand at the beginning. And then you think about the blue parts a bit later, and the revenue and cost could also be later as well. All right, so again, I'm going to just show you the slide again for a customer value. Hope this brings into context what we talked about earlier. And also, let me see if we have enough time right now. Okay, good, yeah, we do. This is one example in terms of how you might want to apply the business model canvas using sticky notes. Again, this should be blown up into a bigger frame so that everybody can share it. Ideally, you can also do this digitally. If you share it on like a Google, in a Google Drive or whatnot, then you can have multiple people playing around with this in real time. So this is an example of a social enterprise thinking of leveraging local farmers to serve and deliver food to or packaged food to low-income families, right? So they've identified their customer market, which is low-income families. And this is actually quite relevant for COVID during this time because not many people, or people shouldn't be out and about as much, right? Maybe better for Hong Kong, but definitely for other countries around the world. So right now, what they're doing is they're trying to connect local producers and farmers and be able to consolidate them into like a warehouse, which is like a key resource that they need, and then be able to then redistribute them and repackage them into like boxes of food to be delivered on a daily basis. And they will be charging these families on a subscription fee daily, and then then they would be hiring obviously folks to help do the package and do the operational aspects of the job, and they would also be paying the food producers as well, and the food providers as well in return. So this is a great platform to really connect local produce. They are the middleman to package and dispatch, and then be able to serve these low-income families on a daily basis. That's one way in which you can look at it from a simplistic perspective. And don't be shy to draw. I mean, oftentimes, especially when we do ideation and design thinking, which is not part of this, but something else that we look at, we do a lot of drawings, right? Because a picture says 1,000 words. And when it becomes too much text oriented, then it also becomes a little bit harder to visualize. Okay, and another thing, again, just to reiterate, it's important to focus on value. So when we talk about value proposition, we want to look at words that are not, so you have to be a bit of a wordsmith, right? You want to look at words that can express a benefit or like an emotional value, not features, right? So you can see here, how the difference looks like, right? Features are, oh, it's very descriptive. Oh, this produce is fresh, it's pesticide free, it's organic. But what does that mean, right? You need to challenge yourself when it comes to choosing these value words. So what, right? Ask yourself, so what if it's fresh, right? Well, if it's fresh, then it means it tastes better. If it's fresh, then it means it's healthy. But that's a benefit, right? Think of what the value is. The value ultimately is that I can keep my family healthier. And you can even extend that in saying, well, I can keep my family healthier. That's what I value, so that I have peace of mind, right? Oftentimes most of our products is so that we have peace of mind in some sense, right? So it's just a way to stretch ourselves into thinking about features that we often see, like it's connected to this and that, and it's got these features, or it's got 5 buttons. or 5 colors, and we're like, so what? Tell us what that means, right? I'm sure it means something. Then tell us what that benefit is, and ultimately tell us what these 5 colors mean in terms of value, right, for me. So keep that in mind. In reality, a lot of products we use are over featured. I think the smartphone is also getting over featured, and we're also paying for that, unfortunately. So it's important to keep in mind, if you want to build great products with good design and technology, you should go through this process to ultimately understand what is the benefit and the value for your end user, and not just fancy features. Okay, so just to recap, these are the 9 building blocks that we talked about. This would also be the order in which we would suggest you guys to look at. So look at your customer segments first, and then the value, the value proposition fit with your customer. And then look at how you're going to reach your customers through different channels. What kind of relationships will you build, keeping in mind that decision-making unit. What are the revenue streams that you'll be considering? Remember, we talked about transaction, subscription, ad base, which should not be a revenue model alone in itself. And then think about, how do you do this sort of like bait and hook strategies, right? Think about the key resources you have to develop or acquire. What kind of activities will you be doing? Will you be developing a platform, right? For instance, will you be actually developing a product, right? And the kind of key partnerships you want to establish as an ecosystem. And then obviously that cost structure with an emphasis on value driven, if possible. Easier said than done, I have to say. But I hope this gives you guys a quick snapshot of what are the key building blocks you should look at for your venture in order to mitigate, any kind of bumpy rides up ahead. So I hope that helps. Are there any questions so far? I believe we have about 7 minutes for questions.
We can see some question in the Q&A box.
Yeah. What if I think my business is really only one-time transaction? Is it really cannot be sustainable? That's not true. I think there are a lot of products out there that are one-time transaction, but you also need to think in the longer term. If it's a one-time transaction, depends on what product you're selling, right? If you're only selling a stapler, right, then it's probably not sustainable, right? If you're a stationery store selling staplers, pens, pencils, and all that, then you can still make it a little bit more sustainable by doing marketing to hook your customers more, by doing more marketing promotions, by bundling products, by offering, before school promotions. So you need to think about more marketing aspects to hook existing customers if you know that your products are only a one-time transaction type of thing. So it's possible to sustain, but you just have to try harder on the marketing side. Yeah. What's the difference between key partner and customer relationship? Yeah. So customer relationships are really more focused on building that customer perspective, right? So let's say if you want to talk, let's say the elderly example, obviously elderlies will be part of that customer relationship. So would be the elderly, the caregiver for the elderly, right? Key partners might be that you want to make sure that you are partnering with the right suppliers, right? That might not be a customer. In order to build that wearable for the elderly to wear, you might want to make sure that you secure that supplier in terms of the technology that they can provide, or the manufacturing, timelines. So the partner could be both customer and supplier, to be honest, but the customer relationship is really focusing on building that customer trust, which is different from partners that could also include the supplier side of things. How much detail do you want us to go into in regards to our business model for our project proposal? This is a great question. I would actually defer to the Techathon team for that. It depends on how much you can progress based on your team productivity. I would expect that the Techathon, ultimately you want to be proposing, obviously the problem solution fit, the value, a go-to-market strategy, if you can also think about the pricing, that's also very important. In terms of the profitability, I think that might not be necessary, but again, I welcome the Techathon team to come and just intervene. I think definitely you should definitely go up to the pricing part. So think about how do you plan to monetize your project somehow. How do you plan to make money? Is it transaction? Is it subscription? Is it a combination of both? It could be other streams as well. Hope that helps. And I think the Techathon team should come in and just clarify that for us. It would be helpful. How can I protect my product from being copied by my competitors? So no product is truly competitor free, to be honest. As I mentioned, it's important to establish what your core is and how your core is different from what's already existing out there. Because if it's the same product, then you're not really, I think there are a lot of businesses out there today that can get by, even if they just make a same product, but then you're not really innovative, right? So if you guys are here looking to really transform and innovate, it's important to think of not just a product, but a business model where you can really have an advantage, right? So getting a great product that is not currently met by the market, and secondly, creating a business model that can make your business a bit more defensible in that sense. Ultimately, I think if you're looking at hard R&D, oftentimes people do patents, and that obviously helps protect in some way, but even that in the long term gets copied or stolen in some way. There's tons of lawsuits between Samsung and Apple and other competitors on an ongoing basis, because they're infringing, right? They're being creative with the kind of words that they're using when it comes to filing patents. So it's hard. So it is important for startups to innovate, right? Once you launch a product, how are you going to be launching new products or acquiring new market segments, or thinking about new applications for your product? Let's say the wearable for the elderly could ultimately, after a year or two, could actually be applied to, let's say, I don't know, kids, right? If parents are then worried about where their kids go, or they want to somehow monitor or track their kids' whereabouts. So if you think about ways to apply your existing product into new markets, or create new products, like new accessories for your current market. So those are some ways in which we see a lot of startups evolve. Okay, how to prevent customers from thinking we are selling their data while doing advertisements at the same time? Yeah, this is about communication. I mean, there's so many sites that we're always on, right? Where we see a lot of, fishy kind of data collection. And we don't even know, even if we click on the cookie settings or whatnot, do we really know if they're taking our stuff? It's hard to say, right? We just have to trust them, or it depends on how much we really want, to access that particular site. So I think it's about communications and trust, especially when you guys build your brand. It's very important to build that trust with individuals, and to also, if you're thinking about B2B and partnerships with businesses, to also select partners where they also stay true to those values, right? Oftentimes, depending on who we partner with, our reputation are also at risk. So it's important that we also do our own due diligence and vetting to make sure that we are vetting for the right types of partners and receiving the right types of clients. And some founders need to make hard decisions, right? If the ethics don't make sense, they just say no, even if it means losing a contract. So you do need to make those tough decisions. Okay, next question. How exactly would one find a manufacturer supplier? Do you have to have it? Yes, you definitely do, and especially now that most of the manufacturing is moved to China. It's really important to visit and to do your due diligence and research, and to find trusted manufacturers. There are companies out there that are sort of middleman agents that can help you do that. And then especially with hardware startups, we find a lot of startups with not a lot of Chinese connections, they end up going to accelerators such as Hacks or Brink, especially with the hardware angle, and then they can help you build a trusted supplier pipeline and recommend you to the right suppliers. You do need to pay a little bit of fee for that, or give up some portion of equity in order to access that. But I think it's worth it if you want to make sure that you start off on a good foot. Yeah. What defines a successful business model? Oh, this is more of an abstract question. I mean, ultimately, it's a model that helps you, helps you able to achieve your goals and to be profitable, right? Oftentimes, we get stuck in the ditch, right? And that's, in the ditch meaning, we lose money. We don't, we actually don't stay profitable, right? And that's because the founders didn't have a very clear business model. I would also think in a startup, so beyond the business model, any startups, we always believe that there's team, there's execution, there's ideas, there's getting the right market at the right time. Those are all important, but it's really the team that is number one. So if you ever want to actually have a really good startup team, you do need to focus on getting the right people on board. Really important, because the team drives the execution, right? The ideas are a dime a dozen. Oftentimes we do like to hold on to our ideas. We think it's the best because it's ours, and it's true. There's merit to that. But in the business world, when you want to launch into the market, it is really the execution, and that depends on the team, especially at the first 2 years or so. Okay, how to convince investors to invest if it may take a long time to generate income and user base for a new launching app? So depending on the kind of investors, right? There are typically a spectrum of investors. There's, seed capital. Investors could even be like your family members, even just giving you guys seed capital to kick off. It could be, Techathons or Science Park or Cyberport, where they offer seed money. So you don't necessarily need investors at the beginning. If you can find a way to find seed capital, it might be better, because dealing with investors is also another set of another area that could be very time consuming as you guys think about contracts and how much equity to give. So we would usually encourage, especially for teams that are just starting out and doing proof of concept, try to find a way to be scrappy, right? Try to find a way to just test your product and make sure that your product can demonstrate some type of relevance to a customer segment. And if you can do that, then you can actually have a better data to convince investors to invest, right? So that's exactly what some of our teams did. We had a team looking at developing a pill dispenser for young women on contraceptives. So young women taking birth control pills, right? Because the urgency is if they miss by an hour or two, sometimes it just doesn't work and they have unwanted pregnancy. So the idea is that team had spent 2 weeks in a boot camp, very similar to what you guys are going through, came up with the idea. That was in January. And in the summer, that team came back again because it was an MIT and Hong Kong team, so they couldn't work in between as effectively. They came back and they started doing a lot of user research, right? So they started talking to a lot more young women, getting information from them, what they care about, how are they currently interacting with their pill consumption compliance. And then at the same time, there's one student from Hong Kong U who's in charge of engineering the special chip, right? This PCB board to be able to scan the number of pills. And it's always 28, right? Birth control pills. Scanning these birth control pills, figuring out how many were taken, how many were not taken, and at what time. And so that they're collecting a lot of data. And so once they were able to come up with this very simple proof of concept, which did not require any investment, they then later on went out and sought additional support from the investment community. So you have to do something first. You can't just have an idea on a PowerPoint and say, hey, we want to invest in this idea. I'm sure those stories do happen once in a while, but you do need to, investors nowadays, they are, they want you guys to show that there is a proof of concept and that you guys have done sufficient customer data and research, and to show them that there is a use case, right? To validate the customer before they even start thinking about, speaking with you guys. So it's important to really have that proof of concept and to do your work, to do your research, to show investors that this is a pain point, and this is what our research shows that they need. So I hope that helps. What are differences from usual business model when the business to government? Yeah, that's a tough one. I think honestly, with business to government, it's a lot of regulatory hurdles. It's also a lot of endorsement. So it depends. Like, let's say in the context of Hong Kong, I would imagine, well, if you are able to have connections to the government, that's definitely very helpful, because then they get, someone in the mid to high level senior leadership can obviously get a chance to understand what you guys are trying to do. If that doesn't work, I mean, sometimes using it from a grassroots approach could also work as well. But you need to make your way up there. You might need to have like a proof of concept to test it first for the end user, and then get the government's attention, right? Depending on what your product is, you can also work with, social centers, community centers that may be heavily funded by the government, and so therefore they can be your conduit to get the attention, from the government. That often can work as well. So you really need to figure out what is the scope of your network, and also the scope of your partner's network. So let's say if you work with Science Park, right? They're obviously very connected with all echelons, right, of the economy. So that could be one way in which they can definitely help, especially if they end up endorsing or supporting your product in some capacity. Okay, SWOT analysis on business model. Yeah, SWOT analysis is helpful as an analytical tool, but I think it fails to help us understand a roadmap, right? The business model canvas is a roadmap to help us get to some level of profitability. SWOT analysis is a great analytical tool to understand the environment, and as a landscape, that could be helpful for us in the problem discovery stage. I think SWOT you can think about. But we need to want to move away from SWOT as soon as we understand the customer or the landscape, and we want to really be targeting the customer per se. So I hope that helps distinguish the difference. Should competitors be also included into the business model? Yes. So typically, so through the MIT Entrepreneurship Framework, we actually have a competitor slide, which is we want students to think about how do you position yourselves vis-a-vis all the solutions that are already out there, like why you guys? And so we typically have something called a competitive matrix, right? Which is like a 2x2 matrix where you have two axes, X and Y, and each of these axes represent a value word, right? So remember those value words we're talking about, right? Peace of mind, convenience, accessibility. It could be cost if it's something that's, of high value for your end user, right? Affordability, right? So think of these value words and put them on this 2x2 matrix, right? And put yourselves on the top right quadrant, right? Top right quadrant, so that you guys are, the best at both axes. And then your other competitors would be obviously lower than you, right? That's the way we would think about involving competition, because, from a stakeholder or investor perspective, they want to know why you guys, right? And to show that you've done your research, right? Why are you guys better than others out there? And there's always going to be there's always going to be a way to do that, as long as you choose your axes correctly, okay? If we can't find the right team member, should we involve our spouse? No, is a short answer. I would not recommend that. Yeah, you just don't want to mix personal with, especially with a startup. A startup's very demanding. There's a lot of tension. You want to keep things clean. Obviously, we have seen successful couples businesses, but we would definitely advise against that if possible. You want to cherish your family space vis-a-vis your workspace. Okay, if we're doing subscription model to generate revenue, how to define the premium model and at what stage is it good to set up premium? Yeah, so premium model is a way to diversify the market. So those who might want to be paying a little bit more for your product. So we often see premium models with a lot of subscriptions, right? I would test the market first. That's how we would typically do it. So you would probably have a generic basic model just to test whether this product or service is even helpful for people. And then you can go back to that customer and say, well, if we were to, what additional features would you want? And would you be willing to pay for? So this would, involve a lot of post product surveys, right? And keep in mind, as you think about prototyping your service or a product, it's not a one-time thing, right? You want to have your prototype so that you can learn from your customer, right? You want your, what we call the minimum viable product, so that you can learn what's the minimally least consumption of your resources in order to communicate your product to your customer, so that you can learn from them. That's the key, right? So that you can learn from them, and that they can indicate some level of customer validation that this is something that they want, right? So you want to keep on iterating and refining your product, right, as you learn from these customers. And so that's one way to get into that premium mode, not just, oh, because people are doing that, we can also do that. I know it's tempting, but you do really need to understand, you guys should do research in terms of, would people be willing to pay more for more services, right? And obviously think about how that affects your costing and revenue, right? Why aren't you incorporating those key services at the beginning, right? So you think about that as well. At what stage is it good to set up premium? I would think, once you get that customer validation that they're willing to pay for it is helpful. And also, once you get sufficient, some level of traction with customers. And I think it's, once you have them hooked in some way, then you can offer them more goodies, like, oh, we've updated our software. Now it includes analytics where we can track, these additional features that we didn't have before, for additional, I don't know, $5 a month or whatnot. Then, then those existing customers will then be more likely to, to switch in some way. Okay, what parts of the business model can be put in the pitch deck? Yeah. Do they have, do you guys have a pitching session, I wonder? Technically, your business model should really focus on a couple of key things, right? Your problem, your solution, the benefit, or like the vis-a-vis competitors, and some level of financials. I think those are the 4 key parts. Obviously, each of these key parts can be further subdivided. So within the problem scope, I would say, start off with that customer persona, right? Start with, or the end user persona, especially if it's a B2C, right? Or even a B2B, show us who this end user is. Why do we care about this person, or why should we care about this person? What is the pain point? So draw us into that picture through that storytelling, right? Who has this problem? What is the problem? If possible, you can also think about sizing that problem in a sense, like how many people are in that segment. Let's say elderly in Hong Kong, right? How many elderlies are in Hong Kong? But in fact, are you targeting all elderly, or are you targeting elderly who are in a certain age range, or elderly that are living alone, right? These are different segments that you need to be able to articulate and segment, right? Oftentimes, a lot of judges, when they look at a customer problem, they would often want to know exactly why are you targeting all elderly, right? Or if the segment is not, if the total addressable market is not defined well enough, it becomes harder for judges to understand how you're going to reach out to them, right? Because you're not going to be able, especially as a startup, you're just trying to test whether your product or service makes sense to that customer group. So the more narrow you go, the better success you have, right? Because you only have so much resources for yourselves. So the key is to really understand that persona, understand what is that, what we call total addressable market, which is in revenue terms, right? How much are they spending? And also how many of them are there in that particular group, right? And then show us that persona, show us the problem that they're having. Why is this a big deal? And then show us what solution you have. So the solution could be tech enabled, it could be hardware connected. So show us how that works. Show us a prototype of that if possible. It could be an app wireframe if you guys have access to using those tools that don't require coding. If you guys are able to access maker spaces, and obviously, you can build something and show how that works, or even a 3D model of that if there's a hardware component to it. And then also show us a competitor matrix, right? Ideally, why is your product better than what's already out there in the market? And that would show judges the fact that you guys have done your research, right? That you have looked at other competitors and you guys are aware of what's already out there in the market and in the industry as a comparable. And then I would also, think about the sustainability aspect. So how would you monetize your product? How would you reach out to these customers, and at what pricing level would you be, putting there as a revenue or as a price? Okay, I hope that helps. How am I going to put all these into a 5-slide pitch? Yeah, so I hope I answered that. It's pretty much, the problem, which could be split up into the persona, and how big is that market of people that's suffering from that pain point, and then telling us the solution. So that solution could end up being 2 slides. It could be more if you're showing us how the user will interact with the solution, and then show us the competitor slide. So, why you guys are better than others, and then a pricing slide in terms of how might you guys monetize it. Okay. I'd also go back to the Techathon team and see if they have like more insight in terms of a template or some minimum guides to provide for the participants. Okay, yeah, we get this question a lot. Mid-20s, not much industrial experience, expectation of execution in this stage. So my understanding is this Techathon is also meant to be a little bit more on the conceptual side of things. So when it comes to problems, I think you would need to do additional research because of less life experience. If you're targeting issues of elderly, like perhaps if you can, like obviously if you have access to elderly at your home or within your teammates, that's great. But I would always encourage you guys to also reach out to other community centers, which is a very important part of the customer research perspective. Even with some teams that are, let's say the team that we had earlier looking at the pill dispenser, so they were looking at people in their age group, but even then they have to go out and do a lot more research, talking to like hundreds of individuals. You don't have that time, but it's important to reach out to people so that you can understand the customer pain point, regardless of your age. I think if you guys have connections or cold calls to centers or whatnot, you should be able to reach out to a couple of folks that are within your customer market. Okay, last question. Talking to investors, should the technology used behind be described in great detail, or I just talk about what the technology can do is good enough? Yeah. So I don't know if there'll be investors in the judging room. There may be, I'm not 100% sure. But the idea at this stage is it's important to figure out what is the problem and solution in the product market fit, right? Technology is an enabler. You could have one slide talking about like as part of your solution slide, you can have one slide talking about what we call like a high level product specification. So imagine like buying a tech gadget and you open up the user manual. You often see this one page showing this is like a sketch of the product, and this is the Bluetooth, this is the, headset. So that is sufficient, I think. Just like a high level product specification of, how it's going to work. is data going to go into a cloud, show us that cloud bubble. So that one page, one slide should be sufficient. Doesn't need to be great detail. I think the key is really showing the panel judges the problem and the solution fit, and how you're going to take this great invention and bring it into the market. I think that's what they're looking at in terms of the potential for success. And so that you can get a follow-on, right? You can get more buy-in and more support from future mentors or advisors or coaches or whatnot to help you take your idea to the next level. Okay. Gav, should we have a slide showing the future advances? You could, if you guys have time. Future advancements, I'm assuming you're talking about new product roadmap or future product iterations. So I think I spoke about this a little earlier. When it comes to competition and protecting yourself in the long run, you can't just be selling the same stapler over and over again, right? You need to iterate. You need to be thinking about new markets, either selling existing product to a new market or creating a new product for your existing market. Okay, so that's typically how we would advise students to go in terms of future advancements. So if you guys have lots of great ideas and you guys are thinking ahead, that's great. Put that onto like a product roadmap slide where you have like a timeline. Year 1, we're going to do this. Year 2, we're going to do this. Year 3, we're going to do this, etc. Okay, I hope that helps. Great. Well, thank you all for all the great questions. I think that's all the time we have. I think we did indeed overrun by 20 minutes. So sorry.
Okay,
thank
so
you.
thank you. Thank you very much, Marina, for the inspiring sharing and answering all the 20 questions. So we will have another sessions on market research and customer discoveries at 2 o'clock. So we hope to see you later in afternoon. Okay, so see you guys.